So I'm going to just show real quick, hopefully, how um, I've done the Anki stuff for the lectures, um, just using uh, just using the Anking deck, and then adding, I mean, where I need to, adding a few cards here and there, um, if feasible. So I usually have two screens, so I'm going to try to just show it on one. So I'll go ahead and pull up Anki. Let's get rid of this. Okay. So that's going to update. That's fine. All right. So essentially what I kind of start out doing, I have my own CV deck, so that's fine. I mean, you can do it other ways. You can just have the normal decks, like which would just be here and unsuspend. But I typically just like to change the deck as well as unsuspend. So it's whatever you want to do. So you go to browse, right? And most of you know this. Go over here to the tags. So just to kind of delete or minimize some of them. Basically, right, you're over here in AK step 1v12. And the decks that I really like to use and that I feel like are valuable and have most of the things, even though there's overlap. So the thing is, like the B&B deck, like or B&B tags, like have things that are in sketchy or physio or pathoma or whatever. So like so they avoid like redundancy, right? So and that's all monitored with Anki Hub and everything, especially if you have that. So that can be like super useful. I found that the paying like $5 honestly is a month. You know, it can be a little much, obviously, but it's worth it because you can have like these tags updated and making sure that they don't have any redundancies. Anyway, so the ones I find most useful are B&B, right? Boards and Beyond. They're extremely comprehensive. So you go down here, right, and then go to cardio. Maybe eventually we'll be in like pharmacology or other maybe like MSK or like neuro for some things. But I would assume most of it's going to be in that cardio deck. And then the other one is first aid, right? So you have cardiovascular here. And one of the things that we'll see like in this lecture is especially like embryology is really thin. But then B&B has a lot of the embryology, the relevant embryology here too. And then the other one I use is sketchy, um, just depending on like whether we'll have the videos or like whatever. Um, so maybe especially like for farm, right? That'll be good as well. But really, it's just first aid and B&B, which are going to be, I think, the best. So basically, I won't like play this whole thing or any of it really, but maybe just like go through some of the slides. So for instance, like okay, so let's just kind of keep going. And so, okay. Oh gosh.
Add a little.
Okay, here we go. So skip forward
It's going to twist.
just to kind of show. Okay. Okay. So we have cardiac looping. I just want to show something basic. So, okay. Oh, you know what? You know what? Actually, I remember a pretty good because there's a really good detail of this. Okay, so here we go. We have the heart tube derivatives. Okay, so I mean, obviously in the video she goes through all this, so like obviously watch it or whatever, and then do it, add the cards in real time or afterwards. But basically, right, she talks about how the heart tube forms, and then from the cranial heart tube or to caudal, you get the truncus arteriosus that eventually forms into the ascending aorta, pulmonary trunk, bulbous cordis, blah blah blah, right, primitive ventricle. Okay, so we obviously want to make sure we know the primitive structure and then the derivative. So if we go over here, right, to Anki, and again, I feel like this works pretty well, like on two screens if you have them or an iPad or whatever. But it can be done just on one screen. So let's say we start with first aid, which I usually think is actually pretty good for most things, right? So we come over to these tags, we come over to first aid, we go to cardiovascular, okay? So we keep dropping down. Let's just do this. Okay, so we see embryology. Cool. And some of these things might be in anatomy as well, but again, there's overlap to where there should be a little redundancy, and you can see that overlap here, right? So you'll see that these cards are also in addition to being in first aid, they're in OME or um, be yeah, first aid, blah 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 blah. Doesn't matter. Okay, so um, we come over to embryology. And let's see. So I already added these. Yeah. So these are in, let's see, are they in heart morphogenesis? Maybe. Okay. So cardiac looping, first step of atrial. Da, da, da. Nope. Wait. Uh, oh, here we go. Okay. So then general just heart embryology, right? That's what they are. And it can take some, like, obviously, I just had to click through to find them. But basically, I'm just looking for some of the terms on the card. And, that's fine. Obviously, that'll take like a little bit of time, but of course, like anything's easier or shorter than making new cards. So that's not really a problem. And it can be a little frustrating again going through everything, but rest assured that it's probably it takes a little bit less time. Um, so yeah, basically, like what I did was I have them in my like CV deck over here. I just moved them all before and then just unsuspended, right? So you can see this was pre-made, even though this is a little confusing because it has the slide in it that I just took a screenshot of, but I put that in obviously before. So what it had wasn't this extra, but this card, right? The embryonic truncus arteriosus gives rise to the ascending aorta and pulmonary trunk. That was just in there, right? And so that had this like screenshot from first aid, which is awesome. And then additional resources, right? You can see all of these pictures that people have included, right? There's like this, which is from I think Boards and Beyond, which is basically actually the thing that she has in the slide. So I probably didn't even need to add that, but anyway, um, right? And so stuff like that. And then basically, yeah, if you also feel like it would help for like lecture specific things, I just screenshotted the screen, right, and then just put it into extra. And I would recommend just for this looking up. I don't know if it's an automatic thing, but looking up how to take like a quick screenshot on your computer and have that screenshot go directly to the clipboard, right? So essentially, I can take a screenshot with like I think it's Command or like Windows Shift 3 or something on PC, and that screenshot will be automatically copied to my clipboard, and then I'll just paste it in here, which is much easier, of course, than taking a screenshot, like saving it or something your downloads, and then like dragging it in or whatever. It just makes things so much quicker. Anyway, so all that was here, right? All these are already in here. The other thing though is you don't want to. I don't. For me, maybe like it would be good to unsuspend all cards. I guess it can't hurt to get too detailed, but actually, I mean, it probably can. You don't want too much detail, like or things we don't need, right? So at least in this lecture, we don't have anything about this primitive pulmonary vein. Obviously, like if you want to do that, you can. But if not, then you obviously don't have to. So in like right common cardinal vein, we didn't have in this lecture either. I think there is something a little bit later about the cardinal veins, but I'm just kind of saving that detail, I guess, for later. So endocardial cushions, blah, 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 all that stuff is in here. So that's basically how I do it. I'll just go through and unsuspend. Um, and then let's say for boards and beyond, um, Oh, sorry. I kind of wait. I said that it was a little um, scant on embryology. I guess that isn't totally true. Um, some of them are a little scant. Well, oh, like cardiac looping, for instance. Okay, so cardiac looping, which is in the embryology lecture, uh, wasn't really. There was this one thing, that I found here, but like for instance, you'll see a lot more in here. So developing heart, cardiac embryology, right? So there were just certain things that I put from the B&B deck, or that I found that weren't in the first aid deck. So, and again, we can actually see that I just went to B&B right here, and found a card, right? Found this: the embryonic truncus arteriosus gives rise to the ascending aorta and pulmonary tract. That card was also in the first aid deck, and so you know, again, that just shows that you can get cards from multiple decks, and ideally, uh, they're not going to be repeats, because they get rid of that redundancy by multiple like tagging or whatever. So, and which is again why you want to go into the tags rather than the decks, to unsuspend. A couple other just quick points are that sometimes terms will be a little bit different. I don't know if I can find this right now, but basically, like, okay, there was a term. Uh, um, you know what? It'll just be easier to just explain it. There was a term that Dr. Duanius used, um, in one of I think it's the atrial septation, maybe, um, where she used the term, I think, foramen, but um, uh, the cards in here used a term like osseum. So it was like foramen ovale, and they used like osseum ovale or something like that. And basically, like, it was the same thing, but it was just a different term. And so, I just went in and changed that. And of course, you can do that by just going into the card and changing whatever you want within these parameters. So, I would just be careful again of like just coming in here and unsuspending all of them and assuming they're all going to be right. Like, I just like to kind of look through and make sure, like, okay, I see this term, like, let's just make sure it's right and everything like makes sense with what's going on in the lecture. The other thing is I like to sometimes I personally like image occlusions, which aren't often featured in these decks, and I think one of the reasons is that, like, maybe they don't, like, you can test a little bit better perhaps without the image occlusion, because they're not going to ask you like an anatomy question necessarily, like with like pointing to a structure. Like, they might just describe it, and so that might be like a little bit more amenable to like the card structure. But anyway, just to learn the anatomy and to have like a visual association, I like to have the image occlusion. So of course, like, you know uh, taking something from first aid, screenshotting it, and then adding it to an image occlusion. Or you can actually, unless you don't want all this, which you probably don't. An interesting trick is that you can right click on any image in the extra stuff. So, like, I mean, so like this thing, right? You can right click on that and go to occlude image, and what'll pop up is an image occlusion, right? Where then you can just take that and, whoops, I don't know what it's doing. Oh, okay. So you can just take this, right, and start occluding things. And, like, uh, obviously, you wouldn't want to do all this, right? You would probably just want to do one or two things, one or two important things, right? Ductus venosus, ductus arteriosus, etc. Um, and then for like a pathway like this, you would want to probably do hide one, guess one, so that it doesn't, so that you have like some orientation, rather than hiding all of these and trying to guess which is where, like in the puzzle or whatever. So anyway, that's just another thing that I'll do. And then obviously, at the end of the day, like there might be some cards that aren't included, but then you just have to add them and make sure they're in the right deck or whatever, which is one of the reasons I just created a different deck rather than like having to add them to Anking, right? So I just have all my CV cards in this deck, and you can see like some of them are already suspended, but that's because I just moved the cardio related decks over here initially. So I think that works a little better just to be able to add your own cards and not like mess up what's in Anking. But yeah, those are just my basic suggestions. Hopefully, this was helpful.